Hope everybody can see our beautiful Mishkan, as we like to call it, behind me. And I just wanted to share a few thoughts for this week's Parshat Eikev, in light of the storm that we had this week. Growing up in Teaneck, I had a next-door neighbor, Ed Lofberg of blessed memory. I had basically spent his whole life in Teaneck. Teaneck was incorporated as a town in 1895. Teaneck is celebrating its 125th anniversary this year, for those who were not aware. And Ed Lofberg had been born in 1900 in Teaneck. We used to hit, my brother and I, balls into his yard, and we often went to fetch them, and that's how we heard some of Mr. Lofberg's great stories. Some of you are wondering, why was it that so many trees came down in Teaneck this week? So I'll tell you the answer. Mr. Lofberg used to tell us that, and he was an engineer, I should mention. He had played a major role in fixing the U.S. Navy's torpedoes in World War II. Torpedoes didn't have the proper detonation, and he had actually corrected that problem. So he's a person who knew a thing or two about engineering of different kinds. And Mr. Lofberg was attending a town council meeting shortly after the Second World War. The Teaneck was deciding what kind of trees they wanted to plant. True story. This is what I heard growing up, and it was verified many times over. And happened to be that the head of the town council at the time, what he loved was the kind of trees that we had. And Mr. Lofberg pointed out, he said, you know, the roots of those trees don't grow vertically, they actually grow horizontally. And what's going to happen is it's going to uproot all the sidewalks. Okay, so if you've got those white marks on your sidewalk block, so you know what those are for, that's a very expensive. So Ed Lofberg told him, don't do it. Yeah, it's going to uproot the sidewalks. And he also said when there are bad rainstorms, because the trees aren't secured, they're going to come down, and it's going to cause all kinds of damage, which is obviously no joke this week. People's cars, people's homes. We're so grateful, as we talked about earlier in the week, that with the extent of property damage that there was, that it did not actually cost any human life. There was no bodily harm that went along with it, and we're extremely grateful for that. But at the same time, this was an issue where somebody thought that they knew better, a little bit arrogant about thinking that they knew better, and the result was, unfortunately, a very, very big mistake for the town, and something that's inconvenienced residents on many different levels for many decades now. So if you want to know the truth about the storm, that's the actual story from Mr. Ed Lofberg of blessed memory, my next-door neighbor growing up right here in Teaneck on Winthrop Road. Be that as it may, I think we can learn something very profound from the trees that went down around town this week. And it's based on a Gemara in Masechta Tanis. The Gemara tells us, La'olam yehei adam rach kekana, a person should always be very flexible like a reed, and he shouldn't be kasha, he shouldn't be hard like an erez. Because what happens is if you have a hard, very solid tree, so what happens is that the ruchos come along, a wind will come along, ve'okarto ve'ofachto al panav, says the Gemara, that they're going to uproot it and turn it over and cause it to come crashing down on the ground. But if a person is flexible like a reed, they may not seem as impressive externally, right? They're not going to look as beautiful as the trees that the head of that town council thought would be so much better for Teaneck. But at the end of the day, afilu kol haruchos sheba'olam baos, that even if all the winds come along, einan mizizan oso mimikomo, they don't knock the reed over. The reed is incredibly flexible, and therefore it's better able to withstand all of the trials that the winds can bring upon it. And of course, this is a metaphor for all of us during this time. As if the pandemic wasn't interesting enough for us, you know, we're faced with the worst storm since Sandy. And what this requires of all of us is this kind of radical flexibility that we all need to have right now in our lives. There's no, I would say, people say, there's so much uncertainty. I would say it's not that there's so much uncertainty, there's almost total uncertainty where the school's opening and there's so much anxiety going around right now. What we need more than anything else is a sense of profound flexibility, of being rach kekana, not being like those trees we have around town that don't have those deep, solid, steadfast roots that allow them to have the ballast to make it through storms in life. And we need to have that kind of flexibility, as everybody in the community has demonstrated so beautifully over these last many months, and it's going to continue to be perhaps the most important commodity, the most important personal character trait that we can have. So with the Mishkan, the beautiful Mishkan and the setting sun behind me on this Thursday night going into Erev Shabbos, I wanted to wish everybody a good Shabbos after a very stormy week, and may we all be blessed with the kind of flexibility which is really necessary to deal with these uncertain times. If we have that flexibility, then ultimately we'll be much, much, much more resilient. We'll be able to deal with all of the winds that we experienced this week and all of the winds that we'll likely experience over the course of the next few weeks as we look forward to the Yamim Noraim. And with that Gemara in mind, Afilu kol haruchos ba'os einan mezizin oso mimikomo, all of the winds in the world can come, but if a person is rooted, if a person is steadfast, they are not going to uproot that person. They are not going to cause that person to flail under the most challenging of circumstances. Wishing everybody a wonderful Shabbos.